My name is Jack L. Mace. I served in the United States Army in Europe, and my time in service was from June 1943 to February 1946. Well, I knew what my future was going to be because I was 16. I turned 17 just after I graduated from high school. I was 17 in March and graduated from high school in June. And I tried to enlist in the service, and they wouldn't take enlistees now unless you were 18. So I had to wait. And then they took me about 2 months after my 18th birthday. Did my basic training here in Georgia, Camp Wheeler, Georgia. Started on the 4th of July in 1943. And then I left Camp Wheeler in late February, March of 1944. I went home to Indiana, Terre Haute, Indiana, where I was born, for a furlough, and then reported to Fort George Meade in Maryland. From there, I went to Camp Miles Standish in Boston. And on the 10th of May in 1944, I got on a troop ship to go to England. And that was a very large convoy, about 4 troop ships in the center. And then there was tankers on the outside that had fighter planes strapped on the decks. And then the naval protection was on the very outside rim. And the thing of it is, when you got out so far, you got to no man's land where they couldn't go any farther because of the fuel, and the British Navy couldn't come out to protect us for the same reason. And I arrived in England at Liverpool on the 31st of May. Training in classes and training and rifle training and so forth. And then I left Southampton on the 6th of July on a troop transport and went to France at Omaha Beach. And the beach war was already over so far, but there was no landing facility, so we embarked from the troop transport on the LSTs and went through France that way. And I stayed, then they had replacement depots. They replaced individuals. They didn't replace units. So you had an MOS number, military occupational specialties. Mine was, I had 3 of them. 744 was a rifleman, and 344 was a truck driver, and 060 was a mechanic. But the 744 always popped up first. They always needed mechanics before. And I joined the 30th Division around Mortain, France, about the middle of August. I'm not sure what day it was. And we walked up through northern France and Belgium and into Holland. And I was wounded the first time. And Belgium around the Albert Canal and the Meuse River. We put some landing craft down there to get across the river, and we got to that island there. And that's where I got my first wound. It was just a flesh wound from a rifle sniper. It was in a railroad bridge there. By that time in Europe, there was very little bridges or overpasses left. So there was a German sniper up in there, and he killed my buddy. I don't know. I had saw him. Those rifles were 9mm, and that was a sniper rifle, and it had penetrated that helmet, that steel helmet he had on, and he's still buried over there. We had a person go over there in 1995 and brought back a list of everybody from the 119th Regiment that's still there, and he apparently is Parents did, or his family didn't want to bring him home. He was from Tennessee. But I stopped there at that rural route, and I couldn't find anybody for that name. And I won't mention it, Cynthia. And the other fellow that got killed the night I got wounded, a good buddy, he was from Kentucky. He had been a paratrooper and had jumped on D-Day, but he broke his leg in the jump. And then when he recuperated, they sent him back to the company as a rifleman. Then you broke a leg or bone of the parachute, your service as a paratrooper was over. And he still had his boots on. And they told him to cut the tops off of them because that signifying was a paratrooper, and they killed paratroopers and everything. Second time was probably, it was a mortar, 88 millimeter mortar. And they probably, we were in an orchard there, an apple orchard, and they probably heard something. Because they always said the third round would get you. And I heard the first two. But the third one was the one that, it did a lot of damage. There was about 8 of us wounded there, and there was 3 who were killed. The company first sergeant had to make a morning report to his company commander about how many men he had on duty, and the reason they weren't on duty. And these are from his, he had his own notebook that he made. And then something happened to him in February, and they don't have it. They have it just up till February, but it lists here the people that were wounded and who was killed and who was wounded, seriously wounded. And my name's on here, and I'm trying to, but see, here's one's lightly wounded. Here was a KIA, one's MIAs, and July, August, September, and then I was shipped back to France to a limited duty outfit, a heavy maintenance ordnance company. And I stayed with them till the war was over just shortly after I got back there. I remember when President Roosevelt died, they got everybody up, and everybody fell out on the company street, and the first sergeant said that our commander-in-chief had died. I remember that part. And then they began sending troops back home, but those were combat troops that they're going to send to Japan. It just, well, hell, when you're 19 years old, you're not afraid of anything, you know? I remember someplace in Belgium, there was a Catholic facility there, and the sisters had set chairs out and had bread and milk on the chairs, and everybody, she'd offered them to as we walked along there, you know. We walked almost 80 miles in 2 days. It's a long way when you're walking. Boots that don't fit. Anyway, they also come down through the ranks, and he said, help yourself to the bread and milk. And they started, and then he came back and he said, don't drink it all, that may be all they have. That was an outlet. But when we got to Holland, this unit had been there in World War I. They were just so glad to see it. Friendly. I slept in one house upstairs behind a stove, because in September beginning to get chilly there, you know, frost and all that bit. And they had a radio that he had buried out in the backyard, wrapped it in oilskin and buried it. And when the Germans left, then he dug it up and brought it back in the house. It was a huge radio. But we stayed there in, maybe a week with landmines. We'd take them in the daytime and stand guard out there. Then at night, we would put them back out, and we'd take turns guarding up that road. And then that's when we left and started that evening of the day of the 2nd of October. Then we started our move to Germany. And that was when we slept in a barn there. Remember barns and chicken houses, and that, just wherever it was. There was good times too. I was trying to think. After I was reassigned to that ordnance company in France, the war was just over. There's a small village there north of Reims. Reims at that time was Champagne center of the world. It was just about 30 miles north of Reims, which is not a bad place to be, you know. And it was just 55 miles to the Belgian border where the good beer was, so you're bound to have a fun time. But the people there were friendly. They had a park there, and when it must have been a service. It must have been a department store that was there peacetime, but the Army had taken that over for kind of a little service club in the PX. They had dances there on Saturday night. They'd invite the people to come into the dance. There was a theater there, and the GIs always got to see the first show. And they weren't reruns, they were first-rate movies, you know. Then after the first show, they'd let the citizens of the town come in and see the show for free. But then on Bastille Day in 1945, they had a parade there. That's in June 14th, I think. That was France's Independence Day from, what, Napoleon or somebody? And I have some old snapshots of that. And that was a fun time. It had a PX there, and just, it was good duty that 6 months I was long there. There was nobody bothered you know, and everybody got along. And I don't think there was a typical day. In basic training, you got up and made your bed, fell out for chow, did your training, whatever you're supposed to do. You had to be in the barracks at 9 o'clock. Reveille was at 10 or 11, I think. I never slept in a bed in a building from the time I left England in July till October when I was in that evacuation hospital in Falkenberg, Holland. And after I joined that infantry company, I can count on one hand the hot meals I had. It was always those canned rations or box rations. That was the way it was. Well, like I say, I was in that ordnance company in that little town, and I thought, thank God, because they were readying all these people back to the States, you know, to go to Japan. There were even troop ships, they turned around, had already started to Japan. And this unit here, the 3rd Division, they were en route. And then they sent them back home and discharged them. The Navy won that war. You know, they destroyed their fleet. And then when they had MacArthur there in Australia, then he more or less had the get-go to get back to Corregidor. And I just finished a book about him. My granddaughter buys me those books for my birthdays. And I never knew that he was a civilian on December 7, 1941. He had already retired from the military. And he was the governor of the Philippines then. And on December 7th, they canceled his retirement. And he went back to being a 4-star general. Oh, I don't know. I'm a little bit more conscientious about things. I mean, I've learned more to take care of myself, you know. They teach you that. You're supposed to look after yourself. It was a two-buddy, in combat then, it was a two-buddy system, you know. And when they took me in that platoon, there was an old boy there from Tennessee. He was about 30 years old, kind of like a big brother, you know. And I worked with him a couple of 2 or 3 days. And then they had some more casualties, and they considered me a combat soldier. So they gave me this one fellow that got killed on that island there from Tennessee. And then they took replacements again, and this fellow from the paratrooper, he come up, you know, and hell, the next day he was dead too. It's just, it's scary, you know. I had stayed, there's a couple of those guys that were never wounded. There was 5 campaigns there, from the beach to when they crossed the river up there. And it just, you can't figure it out. That was all over with when I got home. See, the war had been over 7 or 8 months already. It just was no big deal, except your family. That was all. There'd been so many come home, so many parades. See, the Vietnam guys cried because there wasn't no parade. There wasn't no parade when I come home. It didn't matter to me. I didn't come home to watch parades. Yeah, I got out of the taxi cab, yeah. My mother was tickled to see me, yeah. My mother and 2 brothers. And my youngest brother, he said, let's see, he said, now, you've been overseas, you've been in the service 33 months. He said, you've been overseas 22 months. And he said, you've been wounded twice, and you're back home and discharged, and you're still not old enough to vote and buy beer. And that was true in Indiana. I was 2 weeks away from my 21st birthday. It was a big response to that. He had to warn everybody not to get on one side of the ship. I had not ever seen it, Statue of Liberty. Of course, I had never ever been out of the country till I went in the service. Oh, it was gratifying. Yeah. This company here, we used to have our own reunions, and we just stopped having them in 2007 because there was so many that wasn't able to travel anymore. And we would take turns having it every 3rd weekend in September. We would meet and get together. We had it 2 after we moved down here in Chattanooga. And then when I lived in Ohio, my wife and I, we had it 2 times there. You just find your motel and ask them if you get a rate on X number of people, you know, and find your restaurant to cater to. And we always had a ball. Sometimes we turned out almost 100 people. And then as the years go by, you lose more and you get too old to travel. Now it's a hassle to travel anymore, you know. My granddaughter used to work at an optical shop up in Ohio. And one of her customers was Paul Tibbets, the man that dropped the note. And for a treat one birthday, she and I and Mr. Tibbets had lunch together. And he, to that day, never said he did anything wrong, and I agree with him. It was just them or us. Well, you know, it surprised me when we chartered the bus. We had a reunion. I got some pictures of that in Virginia, Luray, Virginia. It's not very far. And we chartered a bus and went to the memorial. And people around there want your autograph, you know. And there was veterans around there with their medals pinned on. And when we got up, the bus pulled off. And people crowded around, you know, and they wanted to know who they were since my wife and I had been kind of chairmen of that thing, arranging the reunions and all that, you know. And I told them that we were a rifle company from World War II, and each guy got their picture taken in front of the state that they was, and I have that picture. And I was looking at it the other day, and there's just not many of those people still alive. And that was 2007, in just 10 years. Oh, I don't know. It's a holiday that they don't pay too much attention to. It used to, I remember going to grade school, you know, that was Armistice Day then. They'd stand up at 11 o'clock and face the east and all that. And they don't do anything anymore.